Okay, so I'm going to just start because we have a abridged webinar today. We have a shorter amount of time than normal. If your intention was to be here for the strategies to increase parent participation in parent training, you are in the right place. Today, I'm going to take a bit of a different approach than I normally do in webinars. I'm going to really dive in and talk about what parent participation is, and then I'm going to really give you a step-by-step, like just strategies to use, and then how to use our care coordinator content to support that increase in parent participation, as well as some clinician tips. So I'm really hoping that this will be very hands-on and something that you can easily take and translate to your clinical practice immediately. Okay, so I want to kind of start off giving a summary of what we talked about in our first webinar. Dr. Tim Fuller joined me last week to talk about values-informed parent training. And if you signed up for the series on the fundamentals of values-based parent training or values-informed parent training, it means that you're already on the same page with us, right? About the importance of really taking a values-directed and informed approach to providing training to parents. And when I use the term values-informed, I'm talking about parent training that is rooted in and guided by what is important to the parents and the families participating in parent training. And I mean, I think the thing is that we can all agree at the end of the day, when we find value in something, we're going to do it. And the same is true of the parents of the autistic clients that we work with. If they find value in something and they find success in something, they're going to continue doing it. So today, as we kind of walk through everything, just know that I'm really basing everything in this idea of values-informed parent training. And last week, Tim used this Chinese proverb in his presentation. And it was, if we don't decide where we are going, we're bound to end up where we're headed. And I swear I'm giving him a complex because I've thought about that almost every day since he said it, as I've been developing content and preparing for this webinar. Because I think that often with parent training, we kind of get stuck in this influx of, this is our process, this is what we're going to do, and we kind of just go where we're headed. And by using some of the strategies I'm going to talk about today, and really thinking about what parent engagement is, it's really going to help us decide where we're going and get parents there. And Tim had used this slide. I pulled it from his deck from last week, but I wanted to reiterate today that the things that I'm bringing forth today can be done at any point in time at parent training, whether you want to start integrating them at the onset when a family comes on, or revisit with a family when you're noticing cancellations and low engagement, right? You can revisit it anytime. Move forward. Okay. So first, I want to take a moment and think about how we define parent participation and how we quantify it. We need to acknowledge that parent participation can look different at different times, and it will look different from family to family. The way that we may define active or high parent participation may vary for a parent, depending on where they are in their life, where they are with that day, and it'll be different for parents depending on their experience with parent training and where they are with that life cycle, right? Whether they have a history of successful parent training or parent training where they just have to show up, or parent training where they're highly active. We know that parents of autistic and intellectually and developmentally disabled children experience significant amounts of stress. They have higher rates of depression and anxiety and health-related problems, higher rates of divorce, and levels and reports of parental burden and isolation, right? We also know that there's so many financial hardships when you have a child that needs additional supports. You're paying for services out of pocket, and you're having to pay for your annual deductible. Not everybody has to pay for that, right? And I'm not telling you anything you don't know. This information is widely available. These are things we're all aware of. But really, as we talk about engagement, it's so important to take the perspective of the parents we work with, because their lives are busy and full of demands. And this is part of what I think makes quantifying parent participation really difficult, because the way that I showed up as a parent last week, when my kids were all healthy and, you know, everybody was at school and I met all my deadlines at work, may be really different than how I show up this week when I've had sick kids and I'm behind on laundry and the world is stressing me out and my kids are having meltdowns and I'm missing deadlines at work, right? So my participation is going to look different from day to day. And if we look at the current body of literature on parent training, both within the field of ABA and then outside of it, we actually find very little data on the process of parent engagement and how it evolves over time. And we see that things like collaboration and actively engaging in sessions and completing homework tasks between parent training sessions, these often aren't included in what we're talking about with a definition of parent engagement. So then I started thinking about this webinar and I was like, well, then how do we define and quantify it for our practice, right? What do we really do to say, this is what parent participation looks like? So I've borrowed this model from these brilliant authors. I like this one the best. It is by Piotrowska and colleagues. And what they do is they map out parent engagement into these 4 distinct phases or categories. I think we can think about them in isolation, but they kind of flow within one another. These were originally talked about for parent training for kids with behavioral or conduct disorders and ADHD. But when we think about engagement and we map it out in this way, what I think it does is it gives us a very systematic and purposeful categorization of what engagement looks like through parent training. So it allows us to be very specific in how we quantify parent engagement, and then how we can either problem solve or proactively plan for that parent engagement. So I'm going to just quickly talk through these, and then I'm going to go through tips after this. So the first one is connect. And they talk about connect as connecting a parent to services. And this is where we think about like the parent agreeing to services. And in ABA parent training, this is where I consider like the treatment planning, goal creation, parents are giving consent, and kind of developing what parent training looks like, right? It's them saying yes to it. Attend is the second area. And this is where we're really looking at attendance, right? It's the words right there. And we can think about that in 2 ways, especially when we're thinking about care coordinator and CR elements content. We can think of attendance as showing up for a parent training session that we have scheduled with the family and is a billable unit. We can also think of it as them showing up and completing the lessons that we've assigned to them or that you've assigned to them in their portal in CR Care Coordinator, right? It's them showing up and doing, like being present for it. Where we really start to see better outcomes, though, is in this participation phase, because this really goes beyond attendance, right? This is where we talk about active participation in homework tasks, which we can extend to the homework in CR Care Coordinator, right? Those last steps of those lessons where the parents are reflecting on the content and writing in a journal or preparing little bullet points to bring and talk to you about. But we can also think of this in the concept of direct coaching as having them collect data on skills at home and practice the skills at home, and actively participating within your parent training sessions on contextualizing procedures, right? This is where they're saying, hey, well, we don't, for the arrival routine, I think it might work better if we do this, or this is the way we arrive at our home, right? They're helping to give context and nuance to the procedures that we're talking about. And enact is the final phase of our parent training model, or this parent training model, where parents really adopt and they integrate skills and procedures and strategies into their everyday life. This is kind of where you pass the baton and the parent has like mastered it and they're doing it at home. So these map really nicely onto our 3 types of lesson or phases that we have in our CR Elements parent training curriculum, right? We have parent education that focuses on connecting, attending, and participating. We have parent support that focuses on attending, participating, and into enacting. And then we have our parent empowerment phase, which is enacting. So today, I really want to focus kind of in those first ones, in the connect and the attend and in the initial participation. In my opinion, a lot of our research and most of the webinars I attend on parent training talk about participate and enact. And I think not enough attention is paid to those initial things that we should be doing as part of our parent training process. Creating a solid foundation for parent training that is values informed is extremely important, no matter when we're doing or where we are with our life cycle of parent training with a family. Often, I think we rush into parent training with a family and we focus on that implementation, right? We want right away for them to show up. We're going to put in some new procedures. We're going to help them make their life better and easier by, taking some of our tips and applying them. But if we haven't done the work first, ensuring that we have a really solid framework and foundation on connection and attendance, then at the end of the day, I think sometimes we lose steam or parents burn out with it. And then that's where we start to see more cancellations and less attendance and engagement. And just to revisit Tim's proverb again, see, I'm like going to give him a complex. If we aren't figuring out where we want to go in those initial connect and attend steps, then we are just going to go where we're headed, right? We're just going to go wherever the problem is and follow it. And so we really want to focus on the beginning, on creating that really solid foundation. And again, just the tips that I'm going to talk about today, I know I already said this. You can do this at any point. You can start now and just revisit with the family and open a dialogue, or you can do this as you're starting with families. So I want to start off talking about consent. This is the very beginning, right? When we begin implementing parent training with a family, we need to get informed consent for the service. And to be completely transparent, I think that often we skip over this. I think this is an assumed part of services that often parents don't maybe want, but they're just like giving a passive yes or a slightly coerced, or in their perception, coerced yes, to participate in parent training, especially when they're thinking their child is going to be the recipient of the services. And then all of a sudden they're the ones who are getting some tips and help from the behavior analyst. And in full transparency, again, I can't tell you how many times that me as a young new BCBA or BCBA in training, I would hear someone say, oh yeah, you schedule some parent training sessions with the family and just show them how to do that. Or I would, show up and say, hey, I'm going to come over and show you how to do some things. And I don't think that part of the treatment planning process actually involved me saying, hey, here's what we're going to work on. Here's what I suggest. What do you say? Let me give you the option to say no. And so I think this is a really important thing. And I think we might have parents who say no, right? Like, no, I that's not a service I want. And then we get to avoid all the cancellations, or we get to work toward how we can make that a yes. So this is my first step, like go back and revisit and make sure that we have informed consent to be providing that parent training, and that we explain and talk about what that parent training process is and how it can evolve over time for the family. Within our CR Elements curriculum, we have a couple lessons that you can assign to families to kind of just start the conversation around informed consent. So we have one called What is Informed Consent? And this will be coming out in our release either later this week or early next week. Just talks about what informed consent is, the purpose of parent training, and quality ABA services. And if you listen to our lessons, and as you can see from this excerpt on the side, we really focus in all of these lessons around talking about parents and how important their values are. So this creates a really great opportunity for you as a provider to have the parents hear this information and come to you ready to talk about that and make some really values-informed discussions around what's going to work for the family, and to hear that it is a value of yours that you are moving in that direction with the family to make sure that there's a contextual fit. The next thing, the second tip I have today, is establishing a real relationship with the parent. And we are providing parent training to the parent or their child and children, but the family. But ultimately, it's the parent. So they need to feel confident in our ability to listen without judgment. And when we think about therapeutic relationships and other disciplines like counseling and psychology and social work, those relationships are really grounded in listening. Providers will let somebody talk and talk and talk, and they'll gently, shape and suggest and maybe make recommendations. Sometimes they make stern recommendations, but often they are really great listeners. And that relationship is founded on listening. I would say that's a contrast to how often behavior analysts approach parent training. And again, this was me too, where we show up and we've already got our bag of tips. We have data collection procedures made. Procedures have been outlined. We've made all the materials, the token boards, right? And then we tell parents the intervention that we are going to implement, rather than developing it with the family and listening to them and creating it together. And I think this creates an imbalance in a relationship where parent training is something that's happening to someone rather than having them actively participate in the development process. And if we really listen authentically and we take the perspective of parents to be co-collaborators in that designing the procedures and the process, then that is really the way we start to build a solid relationship. As a personal story, I am like a very rigid parent around like, I want my house clean. If people are coming over, I need like my house clean. Like today would not be a day to come to my house. I got a sick kid. I've got like 2 loads of laundry. My son left his trucks everywhere this morning. I've tripped over them twice. I would be mortified if someone came over to train me on how to be a parent and give me tips for having my family like, down and dialed in. And then this is what they walk into. But if I had someone come who listened to me, who was empathetic with what I'm going through, and who had a real relationship where we had trust, and I wouldn't think, oh my gosh, maybe they're going to leave here and like report me to CPS, or they're going to like tell somebody else about how messy my house is, right? When we have that, and someone's not coming in as somebody who's fixing problems, but is coming in instead to listen and empathize and support, then that's where we start to see real progress, right? I would maybe let someone come into my house at this moment with that relationship. So here are some tips or some lessons in CR elements that you can use to really solidify establishing a relationship. And I want to quick reverse. Relationships are something that evolve over time, right? It's not like you do it and you check it off a list. It's something that you establish over time and then you need to tend to, just like a garden, right? So I think at any point in time, it's always great to have a refresher on a relationship. These are the lessons I think are great to assign to parents when we're thinking about just strengthening that relationship, right? These don't always address exactly like, hey, I am your BCBA and I'm here to listen to you and you can trust me and I won't judge you. But what they do is they have content and then they have homework assignments like the one I put up here that really give parents the opportunity to tell you things and for you to be an active listener and to follow up and ask questions. And some of these things might be things and some are things that maybe have evolved over time that the family can share with you, or they may be things that you just weren't aware of and the family now has an opportunity to communicate those with you. And being able to communicate that strengthens that relationship. Okay, this one may seem obvious, but I think that very rarely we do this within parent training. The next recommendation is to actually define success. And this is where we sit down with a family and we ask them these types of questions. And then we ask them follow-up questions, right? We get as much information and we have a listening and a curiosity for what successful parent training looks like for this family. And this goes beyond what goals do you want to meet, right? What do you want to have easier? What's hard about your life? What scores you got on the BASC PRQ or the Parenting Stress Index? This is really, how do I know if I'm doing my job as somebody providing parent training to you? What would that look like? What would successful parent training mean? Does that mean that when you know that I'm coming, you look forward to it? Does it mean that you don't mind not picking up all the trucks that your son left out because you feel comfortable with me in your home? Or does it mean that you have more tips and strategies, or your child and you were having less tantrums or less conflict, right? So really diving in with these questions is a way that we can define successful parent training. Then from that, what we can do is create data collection, whether that's a qualitative measure or a quantitative measure that we implement, or we collect data on every few months or at whatever frequency is appropriate. And then we evaluate how effective our parent training is. Because again, the goals are great, right? We want the parent and the child to be meeting goals. But ultimately, these are going to be the metrics that tell us that the parent is successful and is going to want to keep engaging with us. Because yeah, it's great if my kid knows how to drop off their backpack and hang it up when they come in the door. But if my sessions with my behavior analyst end up making me feel empowered and there's something that I look forward to, that's where I'm going to start to see more active engagement and more collaboration and less likelihood that I'm going to cancel or not show up or show up having not done anything since my last parent training session. Let's see, my slide is not moving forward. Okay. Here's some great CR elements lessons that you can use to help start this conversation, right? I highly recommend having that discussion, asking those specific questions about what success looks like for the family. But then also giving the family these lessons allows them to really think about it. Because I think that when someone sits down and they say, hey, what are your values? Like, how would our relationship be successful as your parent trainer? Parents often, and I think as humans, we do this. We say what's in front of us, right? This is top of mind, so I'm going to say it. But being able to go home and think about it and process it and then come back with a more solidified answer that might be have more systemic or have more depth to it is really important. So you can assign parents lessons around values. We have a lot of values lessons in our library. I showed them during our webinar last week. We also have lessons around prioritization. So how do you prioritize goals and things that are hard with your family? And what do you need to do to ask for more information and create a successful home environment? So these are great ones to assign to parents. I also think sometimes we need to remember that it is okay to change our parent training goals. It's okay mid-treatment plan cycle to realize that a goal is not a good fit and that it needs to be adjusted. So what we can do if we're having these conversations with families mid-treatment cycle, figure out which goals are relevant and even ask the parents. So if we have a parent who's not engaging or, we've designed this procedure with them and they're not implementing, it's okay to sit down and have an honest conversation with them and say, hey, I've noticed that our parent training, like our traction's kind of slipping, which is, I know you have so much going on. Do we need to revise our goals? Is there something else you want to work on? Is there a different way that we can do this? By making this open, I think this creates an opportunity for parents to take ownership of those goals. Because again, where I was 6 months ago may not be where I am now as a parent. That parent might have lost their job. Other goals may be more pressing. Maybe that thing is obsolete, or maybe the lift to actually implement it is much more significant than they were planning on. And so then when it's actually time to practice it, they're like, whoa, 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 this is not quite what I had in mind and what is within my bandwidth to do. Okay, so then also adapting the model and the expectations. So oftentimes as providers, we have expectations around billable hours or, the number of parent training sessions we need to have with parents a month, whether those are, parent education where we're just meeting and talking to the parents, or if they are sessions where we're meeting the parents and directly coaching them. I get that. We need to have that. But also, it's important to sit down with the parent and figure out what works for them and adapt and develop that model with them. So some parents don't have the bandwidth to be meeting, 2 hours a month or 4 hours a month with someone. Or maybe there's someone that's very sensitive to coaching and feedback. So receiving that feedback might make them feel, like just dreading when you're coming, or that it's just too much on a every other week cadence. So when we have these conversations, we can meet the parent and say, here's what we recommend. What do you think of this? How can we adapt it to be a best fit for your family? And again, really approaching as a listener. And this goes back to what I was saying about that relationship piece too. Coming into this and not being the person who's telling parents what that needs to be done, and instead approaching as somebody who's listening and who's going to create something that works for this family, really strengthens that therapeutic relationship and shows that we're there and we're on their side. Oh, one thing I wanted to say too, expectations. So I worked at a organization who provided only family-centered intervention, meaning that we provided, one-on-one services to children, but that was one aspect of our services, which were family-centered. So we had weekly meetings with parents, whether those were education or direct coaching. And one of the things that we used when we started off with a family was it was like a contract. It was less formal than that, but it was like a contract. And we had expectations in that contract for both clinicians and parents. And then there was a little box at the end that we could write in expectations that were unique to us. So the first list was like a generic list, right? Like if I have a cancellation, I'll cancel early, or I'll keep my phone off and away while we're meeting. But then it gave parents an opportunity to say what they expected of the people in their home under different categories, right? Like for communication, what expectations do they have for their BCBA, or what would be nice for the BCBA to do, or for interacting with other children in the home, or for home, environment logistics. And even though when I first did it, full disclosure, it felt very awkward the first couple of times going through it. But then it was actually a document that I came to really grow and love, because it became this agreement between me and the family. And it created just a very clear sense of transparency between us. So then if I wasn't following up on something, we could bring that up and I'd say, hey, I've noticed that this was an expectation you have that I actually haven't met a few times. So what can we put in place so that I'm able to meet that for you, or vice versa for the parent? And it kind of just became this organic document. There was like a list of here's the best way to interact with one another, and here's what we expect from one another in this sometimes complex relationship of parent training. So I highly recommend doing that if you don't already have something like that in place. Okay, and then let's see if we can move forward. Then within Care Coordinator, so up till now, I've talked a lot about content, but within Care Coordinator, we do have a couple features in our app that help with that parent engagement piece. Because again, part of your relationship, you don't want to be the person that's constantly like texting like, hey, don't forget to do the stuff I assigned to you, or hey, like, I noticed you haven't done anything, or, so our app does that for you. So one of the things that we have in there is data collection. And I know these pictures might be a little bit small, but I'm happy to share this, or it's also in our best practice playbook that I can share with you as well. This is where clinicians can collect data on parent performance. So when parents are going through and doing the lessons, you can collect data on their proficiency or their knowledge of that lesson using a yes, no, and then you get a graphic display of it. Parents can also collect data, right? These are set up like task analyses. So as parents create task analyses for their children, they can collect data on these within the app as well. And so it kind of takes out that extra step of going outside the app and gives you one place where you can look at the data that they are collecting and notice that they are doing things and that they're actively engaging with the content that you guys have planned on and worked on during your prior direct parent coaching sessions. Scheduling. I say it every single time. This is one of my favorite features in Care Coordinator because as a mom, I work full time. I have 3 children. I have a husband, lots of hobbies. Like I live on my iCal and my task list. There's so many of them and I'm like rigid because I need something to remind me or it's not going to get done. So our app, as long as parents have notifications on, you can actually go in and schedule the tasks, and then it will ping the parent and send them a little notification like, hey, don't forget to do this lesson. And you can go in and check. And if they haven't done the lesson, you could even go into the app like 2 days before your parent training session and schedule it for like that night or a different time that works before your parent training session to just make sure that they are engaging with the content. And then it's like a nice, gentle reminder from the app that they need to do that. I think that also parents will appreciate being able to help schedule that. So if we say, hey, we're going to give you a lesson, or we're going to assign these lessons to you, how should I notify you? Like we can schedule it. When do you want it to let you know to do them? And then parents can choose times that work best for them. And then you can customize content. Us as humans, we love things that are made for us. And so the lessons that we have in CR Elements are great. They are comprehensive, as you know, but you may want to add some things in there for parents to make it more tailored to them. In this example on the left, I went into our acknowledging successes task analysis, and I hypothetically, for a parent, was going to add in a step that's like, hey, I'm going to add in some successes that I've seen your family have so that as you're listening to this lesson, you can hear me say, hey, some of the successes we've had as a treatment team and with your family is, your child's potty trained. Everybody has family dinner now. Everybody seems to laugh more together, right? So then when the parent's listening to that lesson, they have like an individualized and tailored content in there from you. And it's super quick and easy to do either from your computer or from the app on the tablet. And then you can create content unique to parents. So again, this is a platform that is created, with task analyses in mind. So we have those, but then you can also, during your parent coaching sessions, videotape and create task analyses of the things you're working on with parents so that they can go back and watch that after you're gone to remember what you've done. I am the queen of it goes in and I'm like, yes, I'm there. I'm with you. And then people leave and I'm like, what? Because again, I'm busy. I need the tasks and the iCals. So if you create something like that, it's a great way to use the platform and that's individualized to parents and then also gives them something to follow up on. And again, them going and watching that is a way of them engaging with you and with the content. So it creates an opportunity for them to show up and attend, right? That second step in the parent engagement sequence. So I went over some platform tips. Our best practice playbook, I talked about this last week as well. We have two sections to it. One is about our content and our parent training workflow. And then one is just logistics of using the app, right? So how do you schedule lessons? How do you create a user? How do you collect data? All these kinds of logistical things that you learned about or did a few times, and maybe you want a little brush up on those. So we have this available. If you need one and you don't have a copy of the best practice playbook, feel free to either shoot me a message in the Q&A or follow up with our team after this webinar. I threw a slide in here for CR Unite if you're not going. This is our annual conference, and it's fantastic. It's 3 days. It's at this hotel that's supposed to be absolutely amazing. So if you're not registered for it, consider registering for it. I know this is in a few weeks, but conferences are always fun. And that is all. Does anybody have any questions? Or any thoughts or any content you think would be good? Okay, looks like a quiet group today. Well, thank you all for coming. Please feel free to follow up as needed. And our team is available to you. We have another webinar next week. So we hope to see you there. Thank you very much.